Good morning. Hey now, PASW staff, clients, friends, join us for a Wednesday. Haydn, we looked at yesterday, the composer that some say was, more talented, more prolific than Mozart, but we had a good time thinking about those possibilities and, who's better, who's, it doesn't really matter, but great composer, 106 symphonies, gosh. And then film scoring results are in for The Matrix, so can't wait to show you that. Today I was gonna talk about a songwriter that I've been wanting to get to. Several songwriters that we still have yet to get to because we've done musicals, but I had to take a step back. This is because for understanding, even for me, because I didn't know that much about this historical period of early Broadway. This transformed the Broadway musical, and it's part of music history for sure. So, I don't forget that this is a music class, but it's hard to talk about music history without talking about history. So I thought it would be good to sort of, instead of talk about Jerome Kern, who I was going to talk about today, who we will do a class on, had to back up and talk about, well, where did these songwriters, Jerome Kern, Cole Porter, we did a whole class on, we did George Gershwin. They're songs that we know of, but where did a lot of those songs come from? A lot of them, were actually came from earlier musical reviews, and we'll talk about some of these terms. But we're going to talk about a gentleman that I guess some would say he was a creep, but I don't think so. He just knew how to entertain. We're going to be talking and looking at a lot of showgirls, which is part of history. So today we're going to look at a certain gentleman and look at the period from 1907, starting in New York City, and we're going to take a look at the Ziegfeld Follies. So it transformed the Broadway musical, because we know musicals today, there's still, Hamilton, everything is musicals, and West Side Story is being remade, or has been remade. And the guy that started this whole Ziegfeld Follies was Florenz Ziegfeld. He was an entertainer, he was an impresario, which is like a producer today. It's somebody who organizes and finances these, concerts or plays. So it's kind of similar to just a television or film producer. And but he was a real visionary. So we're going to be talking about Florenz Ziegfeld and the Ziegfeld Follies. So why don't we leave Austria, where Haydn was born, and let's go to New York City.
I'm sitting on top of the world. I'm rolling along. Yes, rolling along.
So Florenz was born in 1867, American Broadway impresario, and he did a set. He would start doing. He started doing reviews. So musical reviews are kind of multi-act, entertainment. So there's music, there's dancing, there's sketches, there's acting. It's not a musical in the sense of a beginning, middle, and end. There's sketches, there's different. There's comedians. And that's why I want to bring up the timeline and take a look at some of the composers that we've talked about, because if this starts in the late 19th century. He really starts in New York City in 1907 to about the early 1930s, right after the stock market crashes. We're getting out of opera a little bit. We did Gilbert and Sullivan a few weeks ago, how they transformed witty opera, but they're done by the late 19th century. He's coming in, and what's going on in the 1900s? Well, we have blues music, we have Scott Joplin's ragtime, and we have a lot of what? We have Ellis Island. We have a lot of immigrants coming in. New York was a melting pot for immigrants, Jewish, Italian, Irish, and they would like to go, these people would like to go see themselves on stage. And so a lot of times, and that's the beauty of this country, is the diversity, of course, of going to see. And so these shows, these reviews that Ziegfeld would put on incorporated, I mean, he wasn't looking for diversity necessarily, he was just using the people around them. So he was very much into, doing these reviews. He was influenced a lot from, by Paris, by the Follies, Bergère, which was a music hall located in Paris, which is still there today. Paris, it opens in 1869, and that it would have light entertainment, light music, operas, popular songs. We haven't really looked at cabaret, but we will, and this is pre-musical, because this is, like I said, pre-stories. I think people just wanted entertainment. It was a fast way to get people in the seats and to entertain them instantly, as opposed to, okay, well, the second act is really when it gets entertaining. People didn't have time for that, I don't think, because they had to put food on the table. They had to survive. They needed instant gratification and entertainment. Kind of like TikTok, I guess. I mean, that's what we're coming around full circle, or something like that, our attention span. So they would just start doing these instant shows, kind of in a way. You don't need the backstory. You just, straight to the boom. So Ziegfeld was very popular for glorifying the American girl. So although he took influence from Paris and stuff, this was truly an American thing. Ziegfeld, and there was a whole branch called the Ziegfeld Girls, female chorus dancers. They wore beautiful, elaborate costumes. Some were, barely clothed, and a lot of people had a lot of trouble with this, obviously. People would call it a low art, lowbrow art. But when he comes to New York City in the 1900s, there's Times Square, but it's not even really Times Square yet. I mean, there's theaters around, but mostly it's in the Bowery district in New York. And so it's not when he's here, it's not the Times Square that we know and love today. So he's kind of like an early Busby Berkeley. We did a whole class on Busby Berkeley. I would make the comparison that perhaps he was the Busby Berkeley for the stage, because when Busby comes on, his movies are in the 1930s, and by the 1930s, movies are happening. I think that's also maybe the decline. I mean, Florence dies in the 30s, and the stock market happens, but then movies are starting to come in. And so Busby's kind of like, well, let's I don't know if he was directly influenced, but I don't know how he could not be, by Florence, by saying, well, let's do the glamour, let's do the showgirls, let's do the chorus girls and all of these, wonderful things, and we'll just film them this time so people won't go to the shows, So New York's really exciting in the 1900s. I mean, in 1900, the New York subway begins. So this is, this subway's going on, obviously, still. So in the world, a year later, Queen Victoria dies. What does that mean? That's the end of the Victorian age, really. We talked about the Victorian age with Gilbert and Sullivan. And so Queen Victoria dies, age 81. And then around 1904 is when Times Square, it was called Longacre Square in Manhattan, and then renamed Times Square in 1904. 1905, we get the Nickel, nickel, 5 cents, because it would cost 5 cents to go in and see a silent film. A lot of this is also what we're seeing on stage in vaudeville, right? I mean, these are kind of immigrants doing these shows about coming from the old country and telling their stories, but again, small stories, not grand opera at all. So Ziegfeld's his Follies opened in 1907 in New York City. A lot of chorus girls drew, the audiences were very excited. He actually started with a male male guy, so he wasn't just only interested Sandow, and this was his first creation kind of to draw audiences and female audiences particular, and he got excitement. And it's a cliche and maybe perhaps, to say that sex sells, but he understood that sex was something that could really intrigue people, and mostly for what? For money, right? I mean, he's in show business. They call it business because obviously there's money. As we're looking, I mean, it's just these elaborate dances, the choreography. It's a delightful part of history. The showgirls were really paid very well, and they worked extremely hard. And from what I can tell, I mean, it was a really solid, good job to have if you don't mind dancing around all day. So a typical show, Ziegfeld show, would be, just not a few women, about 120 women. He would look at about 3,000 a year or so. And so during the show, there'd be 5 or 6 costume changes. And all the clothes, all the materials were handpicked by Ziegfeld. Much like Busby Berkeley, he wanted control. He had a vision. He knew what was going to be interesting and entertaining. And so these chorus girls became the Ziegfeld girls. And he wanted them to be viewed as something beautiful. So a lot of the music, so we haven't done a class on Irving Berlin, but one of the greatest songwriters, composers, did White Christmas. I mean, and so he's writing music for these reviews. Oscar Hammerstein is writing lyrics for these things. Jerome Kern, who I want to talk about at another class, is doing these things. George McCohen, who did Yankee Doodle Dandy, is he's starting to be influenced by what they're doing on stage, but he's gonna do the book musical. We talked about him being kind of the first to, so he's gonna take entertainment on stage, but make it into a more cohesive Broadway show musical, because Ziegfeld was just, I think, interested in quick entertainment. That's just a brief little flavor of Florenz Ziegfeld. Thought he deserved a class. I mean, this is part of early American entertainment, and would go on to change the musical, would go on to, influence movies. And just, of course I like the music most of all, because a lot of these songs are still classics and standards today, but a lot of these composers, songwriters, got their start writing for these reviews, writing for these shows. And it's an interesting part of early New York history that, we don't really talk about. So having said that, we'll be talking about LA history tomorrow. So hope you enjoyed Ziegfeld. Pretty cool, and, fun and nice to look at. Okay. That's it. Okay, see you tomorrow. Bye.